So without further ado, welcome to the stage, Mr. Mark Rolton.
Thank you, Megs. Thank you, my dear. How are we? How you doing, all right? Seems like we have a room full of crazies. I'm watching you guys just hitting the walls. It's crazy out there, isn't it? As Meg said, we're this afternoon, you and I are going to walk through a very unusual, very unique approach to real estate. And for many of you, it's going to be probably the very first step in realising that I don't need cash, nor do I need to own property. Who realises the benefits of actually having real estate? We've all learnt that idea. Yes, it obviously makes sense. Write this down. 86% of the world's millionaires store their fortunes in real estate. Why is that? Why do you think that would be? Why is that? It holds value. Could 86% of the world's millionaires be wrong? Yes or no? I don't think so either. Say no. I don't think so either. So you and I are going to walk through. First and foremost, I commend you for being here today. It's a Monday afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock, 2:30, whatever it might be. And you and I are actually learning different ways of approaching how we create large chunks of money. Is large chunks of money okay? Yes or no? Yes. That was about 11 of you. Is large chunks of money okay? Yes. Because I'm not the kind of guy that's is good at monitoring $1.50 or $2 here or, charting things. I'm not that kind of person. But I actually do have a very unusual approach to real estate that a lot of people want to learn a hell of a lot more about. And how we do that is this. You're going to learn, first and foremost, write this down, what an option is in real estate. Who has actually heard of the terminology, a property option? Raise your hand. Okay, about a third of the room. You're going to learn what a property option is. Secondly, how I make money out of these things. Where is the bucks? Where's my profit? And at what point do I get paid out? And you're going to move quite quickly. Now, who's actually heard of the name before? Donald Trump. Raise your hand for me. Now, back in the days, 1996, Trump is, in fact, if you haven't heard of this man, he's supposedly the most successful property magnate in the Western world. This fellow has done some wild things in his life. And you know what? Back in 1996, it wasn't that easy for Trump. He was nearly bankrupt. Who remembers those days? The media, it was splashed all across the tabloids. Think about it, folks. Trump back then was $900 million in debt. So think about a billionaire. Is that a very unique person, yes or no? Yes. This man was a billionaire at the wrong end of the scale, wasn't he? That's where this fellow was operating. And yet 1996, you would probably agree, it was only 13 years ago. Is that right? Yes. Is that correct? Yes. Do we have a consensus on that? Yes. 13 years ago. Now, fast forward a touch over a decade, what do you think Trump would be worth today? We're talking from $900 million down on your luck, 900 mil below zero. What do you think Trump would be worth today? Have a guess.
About 10 times more.
8 billion? 2 billion? What else do you think? Have a guess. 1.4 billion? Close. Try this on, folks. Since 1996 till now, Trump has amassed a staggering $7.4 billion of net worth. Think about that for a second. Is it okay to say that he's amassed more than $8 billion in a touch over a decade? Yes or no? Yes. 900 mil down, 7.4 billion in front. Is it okay to say this fellow has amassed more than 8 billion in a touch over a decade? Yes or no? Yes. How have the last 10 years been for you financially? How have they been? Still in negatives, I heard someone say. Folks, if you and I are going to start to change the way we make money, we've got to start to change the way we approach money. And gone are the days where you and I would have to go out now and seek debt from a bank and own stuff. Who's been taught that model? Raise your hand. Give me a yes or a yes. Yes. We've all been told that way, haven't we? We go out, we've got to buy property because it's going to look after us in our latter years. What we missed, though, was the fact that we had to borrow so much money and take on so much risk, exposure and debt in order to get there. The game's changing. The game has changed. And either today you're going to be a part of a whole new wave in terms of real estate, or the chances are you'll be left behind. I'm going to share with you the powerful techniques of what the super rich and the ultra wealthy use daily to amass their portfolios. You're going to hear how I've done it, how many other people are doing it, how graduates like yourselves are doing it today in the trenches. Now, why is it that Trump, Kiyosaki, Sir John Templeton all use property options to amass their fortunes? These men are billionaires in their own right. Do you think they might know something, yes or no?
Yes.
And that's what you and I are going to start to drill into today. I'm going to walk you through some basics this afternoon, of short and long options. Write this down. A short option is 90 to 120 days. That's a short period of time. It's a short option. And a long option is anywhere from 120 days to 12 months. The difference between a short and a long? Well, a short, you'll pocket anywhere between, say, 30 grand cash up to about 60 grand cash. And a long option, you and I will put together at least $200,000 worth of profit, anywhere up to several million. Is that okay? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, write this down. Here's the first lesson. Would you like to understand, would you like me to dilute for you what it is that Trump, Kiyosaki and Templeton all know? Would you like to understand that one thread that ties all this together? Yes or no?
Yes.
Write this down. It's control versus ownership. You see, if I control a property, do I also control its profit? Yes or no? I actually do, don't I? Do I need a deposit? Do I need interest repayments? Do I need to pay out stamp duty when I settle on it? Yes or no? I just want to control the thing. If I control it, I control the, what else? I control the profit. I control the upside. Exactly. And that's where we begin today. We're going to walk through some legalities, some basic principles about options, where you and I get paid at what point, and then lastly, as Megan alluded to, I'm going to share with you what I call a joint venture model, or a JV model, as you'll often hear. That is where now you present a property, and I put the dollars behind it to get the development approval or to put the deal together. That's my responsibility. Your property, my cash. Is that okay? Yes or no?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you've heard of OPM before. What's that?
Other people's money.
Other people's money. Pretty smart way to operate, isn't it? And a lot of people at this point say to me, Mark, well, if things are going so great and things are just, flying ahead for you, things are moving very quick in terms of your real estate portfolio and, what you're building, why on earth then would you share it with us? Who would think that? Why would you share it with us then? And the answer to that question is this. Because I truly believe between you and I, we can actually make more money together. Does that make sense? You see, we've created some intellectual property, some skills, some systems, some procedures, protocols, ways of doing stuff. You learn that over time, don't you? When you do something for 9 years, do you learn some good basics, yes or no? Yes. Some good, solid fundamentals. And what I'm willing to do is share those fundamentals with you. You bring the deal to the table, and I'll obviously put the dollars behind it to make it happen. So the skill and the money is mine. The property happens to be yours. Is that okay? Now, I share that exclusively with our graduates. That's not an open offer to all. There'll be only a few of you that decide, you know what, this is for me. Many of you will decide, I know that real estate holds fortunes. If I don't have to own the stuff, if I don't need a deposit and interest repayments each month, then I'm in. Does that make sense so far, yes or no? Yeah. That's where we're going. I left school at the age of 16. Mum and Dad said, you're not going to leave school unless you've got a what? A trade or a job. I said, fine, no problem. So I decided to become an apprentice carpenter. I was at 16 years old, went to the workplace. I was 16 by about 4 weeks, in fact. And I started as an apprentice chippy, and I really enjoyed it. Things went very, very well. I started to study at night time, and I thought to myself, you know what, when I finish my apprenticeship, I would ideally want to be a registered builder. That way I can actually sell my time for more what? For more? Challenge is I'm still selling what? I'm still selling what? Time, unfortunately. So I thought to myself, I'll upskill, become a registered builder, then I'll go to the market and obviously be able to sell some more time at a higher rate. That went pretty well. Finished my apprenticeship, I thought, you know what, I'll go back to night school. Here on the Gold Coast, I started a course in TAFE called Project Management. Who's heard of that before? Okay, that went pretty well as well. I finished that off, about 2.5 years later, I had a whole stack of fellows working for me. A lot of the high-rises you see here on the Gold Coast, Lasabias, Crown Towers, Kira Point, all those sort of different projects were in fact done by myself. Things were going very fast. I was 22 years old, employing 65 staff. Things were really starting to hammer. I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll go back to night school. I'll sit my Year 12 exit score. That way I can apply to get into university. I thought if I can now get a degree in structural engineering, I thought then I can do everything under one roof. Does that make sense? I'll be able to do the whole lot, from the building, the project management, the whole lot. I thought that would be smart. So off I went. Sat my year 12 exit score, did well, got into university, things were going fantastic. One day I walk out of a lecture theatre. I turn on my telephone and realise at this point I was 22 years old. I was living in a penthouse here on the Gold Coast, had a stack of cash, fast cars, boats, jet skis, toys, all the trimmings, right? Things were looking fantastic. Walk out of a lecture theatre one day and turn on my telephone. And it's my secretary at the time. Her name's Maureen. She says, Mark, I've got some really bad news for you. She said, the manager that you've appointed to your company whilst you've been at university has embezzled over $200,000 in cash. Is that a lot of money? Yes or no? Yes. This was 12 years ago when 200 grand was in fact a substantial amount of money. Remember those days? Today, 200 grand would buy a carport on the Gold Coast, wouldn't it? Right? There's a lot of cash. And here I was. Not only did this man steal 200 grand that wasn't his, folks, he actually left me with a $230,000 tax bill as well. So how do you feel? Mr. Successful, 22 years old, things are going great, and you're 430 grand in a hole. What are you starting to think right now? Things aren't looking so great anymore, are they? Now, think about it. $430,000 was an enormous amount of money back then. You could buy a house on the Gold Coast in Mermaid Beach for like 110, 120 grand a house. Is that right? Yes or no? It was easy, wasn't it? So think of the house that you live in right now. Think for a moment, whether you rent or the house that you actually own or an investment property. Think of 4 of those houses, and that was the kind of debt, that was the kind of hole that I was in at 22 years old. Does that make sense? Is that a lot of debt by today's standards? It's an enormous black cloud to have hanging over your head, I'm telling you. Huge. And this is the very first thing that started to change. I thought to myself, I can either get really bitter, I can get really angry, nasty, and think to myself, you know what, why me? Why now? Why so much? Why did this bugger have to rip me off? Why did it have to happen to my money and not someone else's, right? But I realised that why was a question of yesterday. Write that down. I think a lot of people are actually hitched in their finances. They're stuck. Because they're too busy focusing on what happened yesterday as opposed to see what's coming in the future. So I started cleaning windows for $10, $40 an hour. A lot of you have probably seen the media. I was literally cleaning windows with a squeegee. $10 an hour, thinking, how on earth did this happen, right? It happened so fast. And I thought to myself, you know what? Why is a question of yesterday? I need to start asking myself the question, how? Because how is in fact a question of tomorrow. Do you follow me? It's part of the solution, is that right? Yes. That's what I was more focused on. I thought, how can I get myself out of this debt? How can I pay back 430 grand? How can I get back on my feet again? How can I bank some dollars once more? How can I actually earn more money than I can possibly spend? Who thinks that might be a great idea, yes or no? Yeah. Who's actually fantasised about that before? Making more money than you can possibly spend. That's where my brain was starting to go. I've got a Walkman on, I'm cleaning squeegees 9, 10 hours a day for $10 an hour, mind you, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I get out of this mess? And when you know what? I've learned, when you start asking the question how, things start to change. Would you agree, yes or no? Yes. The telephone rings one morning. It's a land developer in Queensland. Very smart guy, in fact, a very wealthy individual. His name's Brian. He's infamous for developing large land estates, like I'm talking 300, 400 blocks at a time. The guy owns a lot of shopping centres around the country, and you'd know his company's a household name. Brian gets on the phone. He says, Mark, I've got a bit of a problem. He said, my bankers have given me an ultimatum. I either sell down the balance of one of my land estates or they're going to send me bankrupt. He said, do you know of anyone at all that wants to buy 6 blocks of land in the next 24 hours? He said, I've got to dump them or they're going to wind me up. I said, Brian, I don't know anything about property or real estate or land for that matter. I knew nothing. I swung a hammer for a living, right? I said, well, what is it so special about them? He said, Mark, they're across the road from a shopping centre. They're flat, they're ready to build on. He said, they're 600 square metre blocks, some of them are even bigger, and they retail for 150 grand a block, if not more. He said, I'll take what they owe me today. That's $130,000. I said, okay. I didn't think anything of it. I took down a few notes, scribbled a bit of paper, put it in my back pocket, hit the Walkman and kept on cruising, right? That shows you how long ago it was, doesn't it? The Walkman, right? Remember those big things? You used to hang off the back of your pants, right? I'm cleaning windows away, things are happening. And no kidding, the very next morning, the telephone rings again. But this time it's a buddy of mine, an acquaintance I'd met at a barbecue previously. And the guy's name was Stuart. Stuart gets on the telephone and he says, Mark, now Stewie was a financial planner. He was the guy that would recommend stocks and shares and stuff to his database. He would also recommend house and land packages to his database as an investment product. Make sense? Stewie gets on the telephone and he says, Mark, my business is going gangbusters. He said it's literally tearing itself in half with growth. He said, do you know anyone at all that's got some blocks of land to sell? Now this is the very next morning. I'm cleaning the windows in a Korean restaurant, right? I hit the stop button on the Walkman. I said, what'd you just say, Stewie? He goes, I'm looking for some blocks of land. He said, you know anyone at all that's got some land to sell? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. I repeated everything I'd heard from Brian the day before. I said, they're flat, they're ready to build on. I said, they're adjacent to a shopping centre. I said, they're worth 150 grand a block, if not more, Stewie. And if Brian says they're a good deal, they would be a good deal. The guy's got integrity. He says, okay, well, tell me, what I've got to do. I said, well, how much can you afford to pay for them, Stewie? Like, that's an obvious question. You can hear him doing his calculations, papers rustling around. He gets back on the telephone and he says, Mark, I reckon I can afford to pay for them about $137,000 a block. Who sees a small profit? Raise your hand for me. Thinking, right. I said, Stewie, it's a deal. Now, I had no idea at that point what I was doing. No concept of options, no clue, no idea whatsoever. I rang a solicitor. I was referred to through a friend of mine. I rang him up. I said, Paul, listen, my name's Mark. I apologise for the introduction. I said, but I've got a willing seller at how much? I've got a willing seller at $130,000 a block, and I've got a willing buyer at $137,000 a block. I said, how do I make the difference in between? He said, simple. All you need is an option. I said, great. He said, my best explanation is that you are the conduit in the transaction. He said, you are going to connect the seller to the ultimate buyer and make the profit on the way through. Does that make sense? Yes. I said, that's what I'm looking for. I'll take 6 of those option things. He says, no, you need one option to control the 6 parcels of land. Follow me so far? What's 6 times $7,000 per block? How much is that? $42,000. And that had happened in the space of how many days? That happened in one day. 24 hours, I'd literally now found the way to make 42 grand without even settling on the stuff. Does that make sense so far? Yes or no? Yes. The power of control versus what? Ownership. Versus what? Ownership. Ownership. I actually didn't need to be the owner to make cash out of real estate. I thought this is the way to get myself out of this mess. Paid back $42,000 off the debt that I already had. And I thought, now I'm going to start to become better and better at this. For the next 6 months, I went crazy. I really did. I went and learned more about options, more about town plan. I spoke to developers, builders, the whole 9 yards. And I came across 2 developers that were in a real tight corner. They were in trouble. You see, neither of these guys could buy the other partner out. Does that make sense? They couldn't get enough money to buy the other partner out. But together, these 2 fellas couldn't raise enough cash to go out there and do the development by themselves. Does that make sense? They were stuck. I said, guys, are you open to an option? They said, yeah, no problem. As long as we get our money eventually, we don't care. I put down $2,000 as an option fee on that property. They said, Mark, you'll get about 52 units on this thing. I said, no worries. It was 300 metres away from a brand spanking new Woolworths. Do you see a small opportunity, yes or no? Yeah. 300 metres, this thing, right? 52 units, I thought, no worries. I walked into the council a few days later, had it under option. I said, look, I'm not the owner of this property. I just what it? I just control it. And how many townhouses do you think I can get on this thing? She looked at me and she said, well, I can do some calculations for you. Across the counter. The lady at the council says to me, you won't get actually 52, as they suggested. We actually want to see the density increase there. Now, our governments all around Australia, state and local governments, trying to crank up the densities of our cities, yes or no? Yes. Everywhere. It saves them billions of dollars in infrastructure, folks. Billions. Not a few bucks, like less railway stations, TAFE colleges, highways, hospitals, whole stack less infrastructure. She said, you won't get 52, you'll get a whopping 93 townhouses on that one site. Small opportunity? How much money did I have down? $2,000. I sold that option. Now, write this down. An option is in fact a period of time, and typically 24 months. Write that down. 24 months. Is your lender available? Yeah, just a bigger Nico, that'd be great. 24 months. Now, I had 24 months. Write this down. Here is the kicker. This is what Trump has really mastered. Time is in fact worth more than what? Time's worth more than? You see, you and I have been told that real estate doubles every 7 to how many years? 7 to 10. It doubles. So the more time that we have, the more chance it is it's going to double. Is that right? Yes or no? Time's worth more than money. Question. Kiyosaki today has over 5,000 pieces of real estate in his portfolio. Did you know that? 5,000. That's 225 full-time staff looking after his portfolio. Have you thought about that concept? 5,000 pieces of property. Does he own them or does he control them? Own or control? Come on. Controls them. He controls the time. He controls the profit. Make sense? This is how these people think. So here I was. I had a 24-month option. I put down $2,000. I sold it 34 days later, without ever being the owner, for $1,066,000 more than I'd optioned it for. Are you with me so far? Was that a smart move, yes or no?
Yes.
Have you thought about the concept of banking 7 digits? Have you thought about that, yes or no?
Yes.
Have you thought about the feeling of what goes through your head when you walk into the bank? Any ideas, yes or no? I used to bank with Westpac back then. I walked into Westpac and I said, here's $1,066,000, fill out the deposit form, hand it across the counter. What do you think the lady might do? What do you think she did? What do you think she did? She looks at the cheque, she looks at the deposit slip, she looks at me like I'm a criminal, looks back at the cheque, looks at the deposit slip, and she looks at me and she goes, Then she proceeds to hold the cheque up to the light. True story. She's looking for the watermarks. It's a bank cheque, right? She processes it, and I can tell you that $1,066,000 in the bank changes the way you think. Would you agree, yes or no?
Yes.
Folks, that was a turning point in my career. Now, I don't care what you've got to do. I don't care what you've got to do or what you've got to make happen to get this money thing done. Am I making myself clear, yes or no?
Yes.
I don't care what it is, what mountains you have to move, where you've got to go, what you need to do.